Hey, this is Brent Jensen. You're listening to No Sleep Till Sudbury, the show where we talk about the music that makes your skin vibrate. The show is brought to you by Storyfora, content agency providing promotional videos, podcast production, and all kinds of digital content goodies that you can use to broadcast your brand to the world. Go to storyfora.com. That's Phora, storyfora.com for details. And should you be looking for a realtor, look no further than Mr. Steve Fleming. He's my personal realtor, and I would use no one else ever. Give him a call. You can find him at flemingproperties.com. Okay, I would imagine that most of my listeners are familiar with Sister Christian. Maybe you know it as the Motorin' song. Either way, Night Ranger made their impact in the early 80s with Sister Christian and other songs like Don't Tell Me You Love Me, You Can Still Rock in America, Sentimental Street, and loads of others. So much so that Canadian radio personality and author Tim Durling elected to write a book about this impact. The book is called Sing Me Away, the Night Ranger Albums Review, and he joins me now to talk about it. Here he is. Tim, thanks so much for joining me today. I appreciate you taking the time.
Brent, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure.
Also, thank you for the promo book, which I got a little while ago. It's a fantastic book. I have to tell you, the book is written in a unique format where you present ideas on Night Ranger's entire 13-album catalog. So you present these ideas, and then a number of music fans offer their comments on that idea, which is really interesting. So how did you put all that together? I was thinking as I was reading the book.
Well, I can't take credit for the idea so much, although I think it has evolved. But the idea came from Martin Popoff's series of album-by-album books.
Okay.
I've got a few of those, and that's basically what he does. He's done a ton of those. If you can picture like a bunch of people sitting around a table or, sitting in a living room and just talking about music and everybody answering or giving their opinions on the same topic, and it kind of goes back and forth like that. And as far as the setup of the book, what I will do, because this is actually the third such book that I've done. I've also done books on Y&T in Kansas that are in this format. Mm-hmm. And so with each studio album, I come up with a series of about 12 or 13 questions. And sometimes they're not actually, a lot of the time, they're not actually questions. They're more statements to be agreed or disagree with, or, offer your thoughts on a particular song. And then it's just finding people in my circle or people that I know from being online and doing a bunch of different shows that I know are into whatever band or artist that I'm doing, asking them if they want to take part. And if they do, I say, great, can you do, these 4 albums or these 6 albums or whatever the case may be, mm-hmm. Assuming they're on board with that. What happens then is, I kind of give them a timeline, have it back to me in a couple months or whatever, whenever you can get to it. And either they will send me back typewritten responses or written responses, or we do a Zoom call. And because some people prefer that way, I'm good either way. Mm-hmm. And we actually chat, and then I transcribe the conversation and edit it to make it sound conversational. And that's how it comes together. It's a process that I'm getting better at all the time. Like I said, this is my 5th book overall, but it's my 3rd panel book. This is actually the biggest one. I've got 10 panelists per chapter, in essence, per album. And I've never had that many before. So I really wanted to push the limits on this one and get a lot of different opinions. Now, some people appear in multiple, some are only in a couple. There's no real rhyme or reason to it, but I'm very happy with the results. And we ended up with a book that's just shy of 300 pages. So it's a substantial read.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. I like that you did it like that because it lends itself to kind of a more intimate and an opportunity for connectivity in the read. And I told you previously that my introduction to Night Ranger was seeing them perform Don't Tell Me You Love Me on American Bandstand when I was 13. So in your book, there's a lot of similar commentary. Someone said that a song brought them back to grade 4 French class, which I thought was really cool. I just love that you took that approach in writing this book.
I really like adding the personal touches to it because everyone who's a fan, if you're a lifer like me, if you get into a band long ago and you followed them ever since, everybody can usually remember that. When did you first hear them? And it's interesting getting people's perspective on when they did, because I think there are similarities and yet there are differences. One thing I have noticed is that if people had MTV early on,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm in Canada, so I wouldn't have had MTV, but people that had MTV early on and watched it, their story is different than say my story would be. And but I like getting that personal touch, because I think everybody can relate to that feeling of being excited about hearing something for the first time and like, I don't know who that is, but I got to find out.
Yeah.
In the age before instant access to information, that's a theme that has come up constantly in every book that I've written, because in the pre-internet days where you couldn't just know stuff, you couldn't just look everything up. You were kind of at the mercy of radio. If you had a video channel where you lived, if you had access to hour long video channels, rock magazines, which, rock magazines are a few months behind, and they all, they cover what they cover.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just everything all the time like we have now. It's bringing back that thrill of the hunt, that thrill of discovery, of finding out, like, let's say you get into a band, you really like them, and then you find out, oh, this is not their first album. They've got two other albums. That's more music to go back and explore. So yeah, I try to capture that.
Yeah. No, you do very well. And that I love that. I think it's great. Hey, let me ask you a question about rock mags. Do you remember Kerrang magazine?
I do. I probably, I've never bought an issue.
Mm-hmm.
I never saw it, I don't think, when I was a teenager and just getting into this music, which would have been around 80, 86, 87.
Yeah.
When I started buying rock magazines, it was Circus and Hit Parader and Metal Edge.
Right. And Cream sometimes, probably.
I lived in a pretty small town. I grew up in a pretty small town, so we didn't have a lot of choice. You had what the mom and pop stores had in their magazine sections.
Mm. Were you in New Brunswick then, too?
Oh, yeah, I haven't gone too far.
Okay. Yeah, no, Kerrang.
I live about a half an hour away from where I grew up. So.
Oh, okay. Kerrang was a British magazine, so, and it was very.
Oh yeah, I know there was Kerrang and there was Metal Forces and there
Yeah.
was Melody Maker, and I would hear about people talking about these magazines, but I never actually saw them. I think there was one called Faces too, but maybe that
Yes.
wasn't a UK one.
No, that was American, I believe, but that came out a little bit later on. Yeah, but Circus and Hit Parade are the big ones. I agree. Yeah, the other thing about your book, there's some great observations. Like, I have a YouTube show, and we go through records and like the tune stack, right? You go through the tunes, and we have this thing called Track 9, and the theory is that when they were making records in the day, track 9 was usually the weakest track. You didn't want to finish with that, but you didn't want to put it too far up in the tune stack. So track 9 was considered the weakest material. And someone in your book actually says Night Machine from Seven Wishes is track 9 on a 10-track record.
That was my observation when I listened to it. I said, that's not to mean that it's a bad song, but it sounds like, how many songs? You need 10 songs. Okay. This sounds like the 9th song on a 10-song album. Not everything can be a 10. Not everything can knock it out of the park. It's very, very hard to just keep that consistency up. It's one of those things where when I write these books, I have to be brutally honest with myself,
Mm-hmm.
and can't just say all of their stuff is great. Well, I don't think it is. I think a lot of it is. I think a lot of it is fantastic, and that's why I'm doing it. But when you hear something that's a little bit less than grand, a little bit less than perfect, you get when you learn more about the business, and you've got the old cliche of you've got your entire life to write your first album and 3
Mm-hmm.
weeks to write the second one, and once you get that momentum, they send you back into the studio and you're like, all right, make it happen, come up with some songs, let's go. And every once in a while you're going to settle for something that's okay.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. Yeah, you don't want people's last impression to be something that was that wasn't the best thing. You wanted to end strong, but you're right. You do have to slot it in somewhere.
Yeah. Well, it can be a funny game too. I've gone through records and thought, like, is this a true track 9? And oftentimes it is, because that was the formula. I was going to ask you that too, because there was a lot of formulaic kind of exercises going on when in the 80s, particularly in terms of, hit singles and track order and that sort of thing to sell records. So typically, think about bands like Cinderella and Rat. So the formula was, start with a banger. The second song is typically the single. The third song is the ballad. Cinderella, Rat both did that. I think Bon Jovi did it too. But, Night Ranger, when you think about Sentimental Street from Seven Wishes, so it came out in 85. That was the last song on side one.
Yeah, they didn't really follow format, did they? And
No.
and Sister Christian's the last song on side one of Midnight Madness. They kind of created their own formula because they would end side one with a ballad more off, like a few times. I know a lot of times also, like what you're saying is absolutely spot on, but a lot of times also the first single would be the third song.
Yes.
You'd open with a really strong opening track and a really quality album track that might be a single down the road. But yes, the third song, first single, and then you'd get the ballad after it. Yeah, very rarely would you end up with your strongest tracks at the end of an album. But that did, there are exceptions, right? There are songs that were flukes. I'm thinking of like Mr. Big's "Lean Into It," right?
Yeah.
Where you're like, wow, that's just we'll just put that on there, and then it ends up being this crazy big hit that nobody expected. But I think Night Ranger were a little bit early, and they were kind of doing their own thing in many ways. I think that they're a band that a lot of bands that came after them were influenced by, but very rarely do you hear people talk about being influenced by Night Ranger. And I think that's a shame because I think that they opened a lot of doors for bands like Bon Jovi to get on the radio with what essentially ends up being pop songs dressed up as hard rock songs.
Yeah.
And I love all that stuff. So I'm not saying that in a derogatory way, but I'm just trying to give credit where it's due. I think like Night Ranger, and I also want to say Survivor and Bryan Adams, and a lot of those bands don't get the credit they deserve for opening those doors for hearing a song start off with a guitar riff on Top 40 radio. It just didn't happen a lot. When you had rock bands that had hit songs, very rarely did they start off with riffs. I'm all about credit where it's due. I just think that Night Ranger is a band that people know, but they really don't know, or they don't know them as well as I think they should.
I think that maybe too, this might have something to do with the time that they hit the scene. I think they confused a lot of people because you've had someone like Jeff Watson who played in like a Jakey Lee kind of Warren DeMartini style, right? He always had those ascending solos that were like multi-note and very exciting.
Yep.
And Brad Gillis, same. I always wondered why those two didn't seem like they should be in Night Ranger. You know what I mean? Just because of, like you said, it was a pop band kind of dressed in hard rock clothing, or maybe even the other way around.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. It is a little bit, the lineup of the band, the personnel, the configuration of Night Ranger is very unique because you've got two lead singers. One's the bass player, one's the drummer.
Right.
So there's no one front man out front. Well, I mean, Jack kind of is the front man, but there's nobody that's not playing an instrument. You've got these two blazing guitar players in Jeff and Brad that would have been perfectly at home playing much heavier music. And then you've got Alan Fitzgerald with the beret on the keyboards in the background and the shades. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to say they were a funny looking band, but they were a funny looking band. Later on they started, by the late 80s, before they went on hiatus, you can see the pictures and you can see that obviously not publicists, but the stylists were trying to get them to dress a little bit more, not the bright colors and, different things like that. But yeah, it was an interesting combination, especially when you know the backgrounds of these guys. And I talk about it briefly in the book, but Jack Blades and Brad Gillis were in a band called Rubicon in the late 70s. That was a band started by Jerry Martini from Sly and the Family Stone. And they did 2 records at the end of the 70s. And they don't sound anything like what you think they would sound like having two main members of Night Ranger. Not at all.
Right.
It's funk, R&B, pop, very, very late 70s AM radio fare. And I have to wonder where, when they do truly rock out, where did that come from? I'm a little bit, it's a strange combination of influences. But I also think that because you had Brad and Jeff in there, I think that's why a lot of guys, or, I say guys, usually it was, the typical head banging, teenager. I think Night Ranger had the respect of the metal crowd that a lot of bands playing that kind of music wouldn't have because of Brad and Jeff. They were always in the guitar magazines, usually featured as a duo together. And of course, we know Brad had that brief stint playing with Ozzy, replacing Randy Rhoads. And it's almost like if you've been in Ozzy's band, it's almost like, the metal gods have anointed you. So forever and a day, you'll be known as an Ozzy guitar player. Look how excited people got, as we're discussing this, look how excited people got when they got to see Jakey Lee again. Right. So I think that's why they were able to, in certain circles, they had a lot of respect. And, you can picture the conversation, somebody, maybe they're into, they're all about Maiden and Priest. Maybe they're into the thrash stuff, but they also like Night Ranger. And if somebody was like, why do you like Night Ranger? And they're like, listen to it. Listen to the solos, So it's almost like they get a pass. But you're right. It was a strange combination. It certainly didn't look like there was anything premeditated about it. And what I think is great about that band, I don't think that there was a lot of pressure to write in a commercial vein. I know later on there was record company pressure to write more ballads after they had a huge hit with one. But as far as writing the mid-tempo and the anthemic kind of really hooky song, I think they just wrote that way naturally. They didn't have anybody leaning on them because they weren't a band that were like, yeah, well, we wanted to rock, and they do, but they do it melodically, and it never seems forced. It seems like these are the songs that just came out of this particular session.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I've heard Brad Gillis say that. I think he actually said that on American Bandstand that we write these melody lines with each other, Jeff and I, and to try to make it interesting or something. So there was always this intention of like crossover, and I think about also songs like At Night She Sleeps. You hear that keyboard flourish, and I think that somebody mentions that in your book, actually, that weird little thing that Fitz does in the
there's a little blip that Fitz does, and it always it doesn't take me by surprise, but I'm like, why is that there?
I think I know why that's there.
Well, the other thing about Night Ranger is that they initially, once they got together, they were initially more of a new wave type of band. They were called Stereo.
Yeah.
And somehow that morphed into what ended up being Night Ranger. And I think it was just maybe the same songs, but they decided to add more guitar. I don't know like I said, I'm not sure where it came from. But yeah, you did have that little new wavy element because of Alan Fitzgerald.
Yeah. I think that Boardwalk was the imprint that they were on, I think, right? Neil Bogart owned that.
That was their initial label, yeah.
And so I think that the intention, and given the time again with new wave being popular, but also hard rock coming up with Van Halen and Quiet Riot and everybody else, that they almost wanted to kind of have their finger in both pies. And it's like that little keyboard flourish was like, Don't Tell Me You Love Me was a heavy tune, and that attracts the metalheads, right? Like myself at the time. But this is a little subtle notice that the music is intended to have crossover appeal. So it's also pop, don't forget, because we want that share of the market too.
Right. Yeah, and songs on side 2 of Dawn Patrol, like Young Girl in Love and Penny, I mean, I would imagine those were songs they had kicking around because those are very, very pop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly.
And that's not a bad word. That's not pop in a bad word. That's pop as in popular songs that speak to a great many people. And yet they've got Eddie's Coming Out Tonight and Play Rough and the song Night Ranger.
That's right.
It's a strange but wonderful combination, really. And it never sounds, the stylistic shifts never sound too stylistically different. They never sound like you're listening to different bands. There's a sound there. There's a Night Ranger sound. Mm-hmm. That's just intrinsic in that music, and I think that they're very good at it. Really good example for me of how they do this dynamically is the song "Sing Me Away," because it starts out with like a heavier riff, really cool riff. It goes along. The guitar almost kind of disappears for the verses. It's kind of a chugging thing. By the time the chorus comes, it's this full-on melodic, radio-friendly song. And then when it goes back into the riff again, it doesn't sound like, well, that was weird.
Right.
Because you're too busy singing along. You're like, that's great.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so let's get into your tunes. Sing Me Away is not one of them, surprisingly. You've got 5 here. This was really cool. Probably in the history of the show, this was the quickest return, Tim, than anybody. Everybody always says like, oh, I can't just pick 5.
I've done a few interviews now where people have asked me for my top 10 Night Ranger songs. So I had a list done up, but when I initially had to do one, it was not easy.
Oh yeah, no, I know it's tough, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the first one. This would be my number 1 tune. Obviously, it's "Don't Tell Me You Love Me" from Dawn Patrol. Great song.
Oh, I call it a melodic rock thrill ride. I think that every second, it's one of those songs where there's not 1 millisecond of wasted time. Everything is there for a reason. It's wonderful how the opening, the clean guitar meshes with those heavy guitar stabs. The verses, you've got Kelly doing a sort of Ringo Starr thing across the toms. It's not your standard 4/4 beat. The guitar solos from Brad and Jeff are amazing.
Yeah.
They're as technical can be, but yet they're almost like little songs unto themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Jack's vocal is enthusiastic. And the chorus is just, you hear it once, it gets in your head and it stays there. The ending is just perfect.
Yes.
That ending guitar part. I love that. It's one of my all-time favorite songs by anybody. It's just such a significantly, it just sums up like, this is, why do you like this band? Listen to this song. If you've nothing else, if you can listen to this song, it's like, well, I don't know, that's not very good. Well, I don't want to talk to you.
Yeah.
It's like, or it's like, we're not going to have much to talk. We don't have much in common, I don't think, because that's the kind of music that I like. And another thing I love about this band, and it's the same thing that I love about Triumph, is that their music tends to be positive.
Yeah.
It's lyrically positive. It's anthemic. They don't do dour and depressive. They've had moments in a few, like some of their latter day albums, where they try different things. It doesn't work. What they do best is feel good rock. It's the kind of music that it can bring you out of a bad mood. You hear the right song at the right time, and it can do that, right? Well, for me, this band has so many songs that will do that, and I'll just be like, yeah, you know what? Things aren't so bad, and I've got that song in my head.
Next one's Sentimental Street from 7 Wishes.
This one's very, very special for me because, so as I talk about in my introduction to the book, like millions of other people, as much as I wish I could say I was in on the ground floor, I wasn't. I heard Sister Christian on a radio. It was a boombox. It was either a radio or a cassette. I don't know. Liked it instantly. Didn't know the name of the song. I thought it was called Motorin'. Didn't know what it was about. Really didn't know what it was about. I just knew I liked it. And then I caught the video for Rockin' America. Liked that. Don't know if I had put it together that was the same band at the time. But by the time that Sentimental Street came out, this would have been beginning of the summer of 1985. So I would have been 10 years old at this point, 10 going on 11. But
okay.
I remember, because I was listening to Top 40 radio at this point. This is really when I started paying attention to Casey Kasem, and then watching, in Canada here, watching video hits every weekday afternoon after school, and figuring and recording songs off the radio onto blank cassettes. So this was the first Night Ranger song to come out as I'm sort of paying attention, really ready to hear new music. And at the time, I was like a lot of kids. I wasn't, heavy metal was scary. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't ready for really heavy stuff. I was more about, Phil Collins and Duran Duran and Huey Lewis and stuff like that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I also loved electric guitars. Anytime you'd have like a Bryan Adams song that had a little bit more guitar, or Power Station, stuff like that. So Night Ranger was kind of the perfect band for that. And Sentimental Street is just a brilliant, brilliant piece of songwriting. And it's a good example of Jack Blade's ability to tell a story. He wrote a lot of the songs himself, and his lyrics tended to tell little stories, and they're so evocative. But Kelly Keagy's vocals are so good. Again, nobody talks about how great these two vocalists are. As different as they are, no one ever talks about being influenced by Jack Blades or Kelly Keagy as vocalists, and I think that's a shame. Kelly had this really awesome, soulful voice. And, again, the melodies, the hooks, they just take you away. And Brad's solo on that song, it's another masterclass in guitar playing. Again, it's technical, but you can hum the melody. He was really, really good at that. And surprisingly, like this is where the disconnect happens as far as Night Ranger's popularity in Canada, because Midnight Madness was a gold record up here, and actually Sister Christian went all the way to number 1. That's something it didn't do in the States. It peaked at number 5. But Sentimental Street went to number 8 in the States on Billboard, but I think it just barely cracked the top 40 in Canada. They weren't a band that toured here all that much. But to me, I mean, I suppose a lot of it has to do with the fact that I kind of grew up on the border. So I heard a lot of American radio as well as Canadian radio. But I always just thought this was a big hit all over the world, and it should have been. I just think it's a masterpiece of a song. I can't even calling it a good song doesn't do it justice. I just think it's like, yeah, you like it. Okay, yeah, but listen to it. Really listen to it. It's got that fanfare at the beginning. That's different.
Yeah.
You don't hear that in a lot of. Is it a power ballad? Like it's one of those songs that's like somewhere in between. All I know is that it's another one of my favorite all-time songs by anyone.
These guys definitely had a knack for writing that ear candy, the songs that just stay with you.
Yeah, and they're not formulaic. I don't think they particularly sounded like anybody. They were a strange combination of influences, so they ended up just sounding like themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thinking back, there were bands that were similar in composition, like Autograph, for example. We're hard rock, but we're poppy too. We're not too much one way or the other. But yeah, Night Ranger, I think in terms of like songwriting and composition, yeah, just untouchable, really.
Autograph looked heavier than they actually were.
Yes.
Yeah, and I mean, to give them full credit, Turn Up the Radio hit, I want to say 32 on the Billboard Top 40, which was pretty heavy for the time.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
For a band to have a top 40 single like that, and it still gets lots of play today. But yeah, you're right. They had keyboards too, and that that factors in. Yeah, certainly there were other bands that were plying in that, and another band that I think of is they were short-lived. But if you remember the band Jafria,
yeah, absolutely.
Which Greg Jafria's, came from Angel, ended up forming House of Lords, but they had that song Call to the Heart that was a hit.
I love that song.
That's a fantastic song. Then they weren't a million miles away from Night Ranger. They were actually both on MCA, and I think they were both on Camel MCA to be exact. Unfortunately, Jafria only did the 2 albums, but and I don't think they were quite. Not every song was as good as that, but I mean, yeah, that was a great song. And I think that was a number 15 song. So that wasn't all that different because you did have Craig Goldie, who was a guitar shredder, in that band too.
Played for Dio.
It's just that Night Ranger had 2 of guitar, shredders. And the cool thing about that is like a lot of those guys, you can trace them all if you think of Hearing Aid.
Yes.
When that happened, when Dio put that together, Craig Goldie's on it, and so was Brad Gillis. Brad Gillis's whammy bar part in that solo is the most memorable part of that solo, if you ask me.
Yeah. Oh, Jafria, Call to the Heart. I totally forgot about that song. I love it. Yeah. Okay, next song is Rumors in the Air from Midnight Madness, I believe.
Yeah, this is a really cool song that I don't understand why MCA didn't push this as a single, why there's no video for it, because it's catchy enough. It could have gotten on the radio, especially after the doors had been kicked open with Sister Christian. This is a song they've always done live in concert. It's a fan favorite. There's so many cool parts about it. At the beginning of it, it's got this sound, which I think a lot of people thought was a keyboard, but is actually guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And it's Brad and Jeff doing they're doing that thing that like Eddie Van Halen did on the Cathedral instrumental on Diver Down, where you don't hear the attack on the string, you just hear the note.
Right.
Rick Emmett would do that a lot too.
Yeah.
But it's a really cool thing, and it's kind of new wavy. It's got those keyboards again, but once the chorus kicks in, it absolutely rocks. But again, it's hooky and it gets in your head, and yeah, that's a mystery to me. It was a mainstream rock hit, but it was never, like I said, it was never floated as a single, and I've never understood why.
Yeah, that's that's a whole separate podcast, going through records and thinking like Vienna.
From Night Ranger too, and I rail about this a lot. MCA wasn't exactly the best hard rock label. We're going to call them a hard rock. They weren't the worst. I'm going to say A&M was the worst because I'm a huge Y&T fan, and I think that they dropped the ball with that band. So A&M is usually the label I pick on the most because I'm such a huge fan of the band Y&T. That was my second book, and I think they should have been superstars. But A&M didn't have a clue on how to market bands like that. MCA weren't quite like that, but one thing I will say is none of those Night Ranger albums that they put out had more than 3 singles, and I don't understand why. Like if the album's still selling, why not try another single?
Right.
And when I say try another single, don't just put it out as a promo single. Give them a little money, let them shoot a video, and see what happens. Now, the Rumors in the Air could have been maybe not a top 10 hit, but it could have been top 20.
I think you just hit it on the head there. Give them a little money. It was the money. It was somebody saying in the boardroom, "Are we going to get a return on this? Maybe not. So let's not put
But
the
that's
money
the
up
thing,
front."
they might have, and I don't understand why these record companies would short themselves just to. There's something interesting about MCA that I never picked up on until I saw an interview with Ron Keel.
Mm-hmm.
They had a couple albums on MCA, and he said, if you look at most MCA albums, they're just a photo of the band. Now, I never noticed that before. Dawn Patrol's got this really cool cover, satellite dishes and stuff. Midnight Madness. I mean, Midnight Madness is a cool cover because of everything that's going on in the background, but what is it? It's a photo of the band.
Mm-hmm.
What's on Seven Wishes? Well, that's cool. There's a plane, but the band's on it. Big Life, photo of the band. So this is not a label that was spending a lot of money on
Graphic
packaging.
art.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a really good point. Ron
That's
Keel.
an excellent point. I never thought about that before because, well, where he was getting at is when they did their album, The Final Frontier, that's got this excellent John Taylor Dismukes cover.
Yeah.
And they had Gene Simmons producing them, and the label said, oh, we're not paying for that. And, Gene's like, fine, we'll take it to another label. And, they had that in their corner. But yeah, Night Ranger, their album covers are hit and miss as much as I love the band. And I talk about that in the book, too. Most of the time, it's either a great big logo or it's a photo of the band.
Reason to Be from Man in Motion is next.
Yeah, boy, you talk about MCA dropping the ball. Man in Motion was the fifth Night Ranger album. It was the final one for MCA, and it came out in September '88 and died on the vine. It was within the delete bins, or it was in the delete bins within a year of it coming out, which is a shame because I have gone on record as saying that's my favorite Night Ranger album. There were no hits from it. What was different about that album was that by this time Alan Fitzgerald had left. They would reconvene, but he left. So they were down to a 4-piece, even though obviously there were still keyboards on the album. They weren't, for the most part, they weren't the main focus of the songs. It was very, very guitar driven, but still the songwriting was there. There were so many potential hit songs on that album, and it just didn't happen. Reason to Be got a little bit of play. It was a minor mainstream rock hit, but it's a minor epic. It doesn't have an epic length, but it starts out acoustically, it kicks in, and then it ends acoustically. Again, great lyrics, great, everybody's got to have a reason to be. It's that anthemic. It's like looking at the bright side of life instead of looking in the gutters.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel good. And it's a fantastic song from a tragically overlooked album.
And to wrap it up, from Somewhere in California, Time of Our Lives.
Yeah, this is really, really interesting. And this is something that's touched upon a lot. Somewhere in California, is a relatively latter-day Night Ranger album. Their last few have all been on Frontiers Records, which is an Italian label that is home to a lot of bands from the 70s and 80s, melodic rock bands, or newer bands that are sort of plying their trade in that same kind of melodic rock thing, which apparently has quite an audience over in Europe.
Mm-hmm.
The sad thing is they just don't have the reach over here. I've said this before. I don't think I've ever seen a Frontiers Records release in a regular record store. I've always had to order them online. So sadly, a lot of these latter-day albums, which is one of the reasons I wanted to do this book, are overlooked. And in some cases, just people don't even know. They think they put out those albums in the 80s and they got back together and they're just touring the catalog. They're still making great music. Somewhere in California came on the heels of an album called Hole in the Sun, which came out in 2007, which to my mind is where Night Ranger got the farthest away from what it is that made them themselves. It's a very, very aggressive album. I hear anger in it. The band were not getting along. This is the last album with Jeff Watson, and I hear it in the songwriting, and I hear it in the lyrical content and everything. it's a confused album to me. It's an identity crisis. Very little of that Night Ranger DNA is there. Somewhere in California is where they get it back. Sometimes, for some reason, they had to get that out of their system. Somewhere in California is a renaissance for Night Ranger because it's one of very few occurrences of a veteran band, I guess now we call them heritage acts, putting out a new album that is every bit as good as their classic material. You could play that to a new fan because most of the time, if somebody's going to say, where would I start with Night Ranger or any older band that's been around for a long time, almost never you're going to say, well, listen to this one from a few years ago.
Yeah.
You're going to say one of the first few, one of the ones that hit, one of the ones that were platinum or gold or had a couple of singles that you might recognize. Somewhere in California, I would have no problem giving that to someone if they've only heard Sister Christian or maybe they've got the greatest hits and say, listen to this. This is Night Ranger. And Time of Our Lives is a classic power ballad in form and design. It's a song that, had it come out in Night Ranger's heyday, could have been a top 10 single or higher. It's an amazingly good, well-written ballad. And a lot of times when bands, even if they're known for their ballads, at a certain point, you feel like saying to them, guys, this is great. You don't need to write any more ballads because you're not going to be able to better what you've already done. This is right up there with Sentimental Street or Goodbye or Sister Christian or Call My Name. It's a great song. It's a lighter waving song. There are a few songs on these latter-day Night Ranger albums I like to say we should be sick of.
Yeah.
We should be sick of hearing them on, go to the drugstore to pick something out. Oh, this song again. There are songs that are that good that deserve that. So I wanted to put a latter-day song in there, and that's definitely the best of them, I think. It just happens to be a ballad. But that whole album, Somewhere in California, is an amazingly good album.
Yeah, no, I'm not familiar with it, so I'll check it out. But Tim, listen, thanks for the walk down memory lane, man. This has been, you've reintroduced me to Night Ranger here, a band that I never really got too heavily into, but always loved Don't Tell Me You Love Me. And I went through and listened to a couple of the records, and I was very happy about it. So thank you.
Oh, listen, that's one of the reasons I do these. And you're right. And I think that's the same with a lot of people. They're kind of a band that I don't want to say people took for granted, but they didn't have the wow factor. They whether it was the appearance or maybe, I don't know what it was. They just weren't at that forefront. They weren't always on the covers of the magazines. And they were just kind of a band in the back, kind of percolating away in the background, that people were like, oh yeah, Night Ranger. But I've heard this from a lot of people. And when they come back to me and they go, I never really listened to them before other than the greatest hits. Or in the 80s, I had Midnight Madness and Seven Wishes. And now I've listened to the newer stuff and it's really good. And yeah, it's ripe for rediscovery. And yep. I'm happy to turn people onto this stuff because it's quality stuff. The new stuff stands up with those classic 80s albums. It's really hard if you grew up listening to an album, any of those albums that came out in the 80s that you got into way back in the day, the ones that you've heard so many times, you can play them in your head. You don't even need to physically listen to them. It's hard for anything newer to compete with that. These are every bit as good. So for those that get to hear this stuff for the first time, honestly, I'm jealous.
No, I know what you mean because there's a bias for sure. And I'm very, very guilty of that. Have you reached out
those years and years of memory, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Have you reached out to anybody in the band about this book?
Well, yes and no, not directly. But someone that I want to give a shout out to is a guy named Josh Weaver, who is the admin on an excellent Night Ranger page called Fans in Motion, which obviously is a play on Man in Motion. Yeah. And it's a podcast that started up, I think, post-COVID. And when I discovered it, I'm like, are these guys talking about Night Ranger? I love Night Ranger. Nobody talks about Night Ranger. They really reignited my fandom. And a lot of the panelists in the book came directly from Fans in Motion. They're on YouTube, but they have a very, very active Facebook community. And it to the point where, they've gotten to work with the band a little bit. So there are books that were placed in the band members' hands. I haven't heard anything back. Hopefully it's good.
Well, hopefully.
But I haven't talked to any of the guys directly in Night Ranger, but I met them once, and there's a photo in the book, just a
Yeah.
meet and greet, just those real quick meet and greet things. But the one time I got to see them live, there's a photo at the beginning of the book. I had to put that in.
Yeah, I saw that. Well, you know what? I think you're doing them a good service, so good for you. It's a great book.
Well, I don't think there's ever been a book about Night Ranger before, so for me, that's another, like, every classic band should be commemorated this way, I think.
Well, you have a lot of work ahead of you then, Tim.
I do. I've got 3 other books. I got 3 books right now that are in various states of being prepared. So
Okay, great, good. Well, we look forward to that. Folks, the book is called Sing Me Away, the Night Ranger album review. Tim Durling, thank you so much. I appreciate your time today. And thanks for shooting me a promo copy of the book. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
I appreciate you having me on, Brett. And just a reminder to folks that the books are available on Amazon worldwide. All of my books are.
Grab them. All right, this has been No Sleep Till Sudbury with Brent Jensen and my special guest, Mr. Tim Durling. Tim, thank you. I really appreciate it, man.
Brent Jensen is the best-selling author of No Sleep Till Sudbury, Leftover People, and All My Favorite People Are Broken. All titles available in stores and on Amazon worldwide.